The Healthcare Security Cast is sponsored by 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And by Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's GENETEC.com. And by the Change Execution Group. Visit 360lifetransformations.com. Before we get into today's show, I want to invite you to connect with the Healthcare Security Cast on a new platform. It's a text-based platform called Community. To join, all you have to do is text my community number, and that number is 647-372-2042. That number again is 647-372-2042. The first message is automated. It's just to get you set up and added into the system. Everything after that will be direct engagement with me. This platform will allow you to stay up to date on everything that we're doing on the Healthcare Security Cast, as well as engage with me one-on-one. Also, as we move forward, there'll be other opportunities to connect with study groups and special interest groups. Your information is kept private, and you can opt out at any time by simply texting STOP. Again, to join, just text JOIN to 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. Right now, text messages can only be received from Canada and the U.S.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Friday, August the 7th. I'm joined today by Lauren Sergy. Lauren, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Brian.
Awesome. And I always like to start off by learning about our guest, so I'll ask the question, who is Lauren Sergy?
It's a good question. Lauren Sergy was once the world's worst librarian and is not doing that anymore. But it actually is rather germane to what I do now. I help leaders discover what I like to call the art, science, and alchemy of public speaking and communication. So essentially, I help people improve their face-to-face, real-time communication skills. And I got into that because even though I wasn't a terribly good librarian, I was a very good presenter. And I used to have to spend a lot of time convincing other librarians to use software programs, take on policies, etc., that they didn't want to do. So I kind of discovered this little niche skill that I had in terms of persuasive presentation. And after a while, people started asking me saying, hey, that was awesome. I never thought our staff would start using that database. Could you come back again and tell us how to present the way that you do? I'm like, oh, why, yes, and I would enjoy doing that much more, actually. But I think that came about because I also have a background in acting, in radio work, in performance arts, and in English and classical rhetoric through my studies in Greek and Roman classics. So it's kind of this weird background in oratorical arts that all came together into this business that I now do, helping leaders become better communicators.
Okay, excellent. And you talked about your career path there. I want to circle back and find out a little bit more about this librarian experience. Why would you say you're the world's worst librarian?
There are many different kinds of librarians. I never really worked directly public facing. I was always a behind the scenes sort of person. And I was terrible at it, not because of the work itself, but just because I didn't find the work environment stimulating enough. Now, do not get me wrong, libraries are busy. Some of them are huge organizations. They can be very busy, challenging environments to work in, but the career path I was on wasn't scratching enough of an itch. And a big portion of that itch was, I'm not out speaking to people the way that I want to on the topics that I want to. So I just kind of became a little disengaged with the whole thing.
Well, wait, fair enough. I think all of us have had those experiences. I'll share one real quick. Outside of working with my dad, my first job was at Colonel's Popcorn. So those little popcorn booths
Yeah.
in the middle of the mall, those kiosks. And I'm 6'3", and I was, I was in high school at the time. I was 16, so I wasn't that much shorter than I am now. So it was a really awkward working environment. Me and my best friend worked there, who's 6'6", and yeah, we didn't do well. We ended up both getting fired from that job, but moved on to bigger and brighter things.
So being the world's tallest popcorn slinger was not necessarily in your long-term playbook.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't in either of our career trajectory. All right, but back to the topic at hand. So communication obviously is your area of expertise, as you said, and most people, when they hear the word communication, they just think about talking. Obviously, there's a lot more to communication, including things like active listening and even just the way that we move and gesture. Can you talk about some of the nonverbal elements of communication?
hmm Everything you do sends a message. So when you say it's not just about talking, that is 1,000% true, to get really hyperbolic. Everything we do sends a message, and that's constantly being interpreted by the other person. So an important principle that I have when addressing communication is that you need to consider the entire environment and how the other person is going to be interpreting that based on what's going on in their head, in their life, in their world at any point in time. So this is where skills like active listening come into play. Because when you are engaged in active listening, you're not paying attention to just the words that the other person is levying your way. You're getting out of your head, your own head, which is hard to do sometimes, and paying attention to their signals, how stressed they might be, where their attention might be pulled in other directions, what sort of overall environment they're currently working in, and figuring out how that's going to affect the way that they hear you, basically. And when you start considering all of those other sides of communication, you become aware of things like body language, which everyone thinks, oh, well, if I stand like this, I'm sending this message. If I do this thing, then I'm saying that thing. But body language is very subtle. What it often tends to do is communicate our emotional state and where our attention is. So if I want someone to know that I'm really worked up about something, maybe you are stressed out about an issue at work, or you're fed up with the way that you're needing to report to different people within your workplace settings, and you want people to know that you're fed up so that they take you seriously. Well, then consider how you're holding your body, because that's what they're watching in terms of figuring out where your emotional state is. If you need to communicate calm, you're going to communicate that more effectively through aspects of the tone of your voice or your overall carriage and demeanor than you will by telling people you need to stay calm. You can probably think of that person who's like, we need to stay calm, and they just sound completely wound up, or they're saying all the right things and you just don't believe one thing that's coming out of their mouth. That's because their nonverbal, their body language, their tone of voice is conflicting with their verbal. And if we're not aware of these multiple messages that we're sending out, misunderstandings can easily happen because we're not sending out a consistent message. We're not being consistent in our communication. And the other person is going to pick up on that, and it affects how they interpret what we're telling them.
Okay, no, that's all fair. Now, another popular topic for healthcare security leaders is just communicating to the executive level, or I guess with executives. One of the things that we're finding now is we're being brought more into the boardrooms and being involved in these discussions. But I guess one of the things I'd like to key on is the concept of executive presence. Can you talk a little bit about the concept of executive presence and what that is?
Executive presence is endlessly fascinating, and it's really important to people's effectiveness, especially when they're operating at an upper level of authority. It also strongly affects people's career trajectory, so it's a good thing to get a handle on. It is how you communicate your competence and your suitability for the role you have. And with executive, that's leadership, that's your presence overall. And when we're talking about executive presence, generally we're talking about someone who has that air of authority that strong air of expertise and competence, and they give others the feeling, they consistently signal that they are the right person to be speaking at a high level on a certain topic, to be making decisions, and to have considerable responsibility in that role. You're the right person for the job. That gets communicated through so many different avenues. It tends to be very nonverbal. So posture comes into play. Do you hold yourself like a leader? Do you stand proud but not arrogant? Do you make direct eye contact, and are you able to sustain that eye contact even when conversations become uncomfortable? That tends to show directiveness and confidence. Do you speak concisely on topics? That tends to demonstrate people's ability to be very decisive, to be concise and know what they're talking about, and to be able to sum up big ideas in just a few words. And a big issue with executive presence is, do you understand the values that other people in the room have in terms of what they want to see in a leader? It's not about what you think is right in a leader. It's about what the other people in the room think is right in a leader. So if you're entering a room of other people with, significant authority or high positions in your organization, and they kind of have their own little leadership or organizational culture, they're part of a group and you're a bit outside that group, which often happens. You really want to spend time thinking about what do they value within their organization? Do they value an aggressive standpoint, or do they value lots of group work, lots of egalitarian sort of talk? And that's going to vary from organization to organization. Do they value status? Many organizations, especially those with really strong hierarchies, like at hospitals, like at educational institutions and government, value status a great deal, and they're going to be looking for status signals. These signals can come in the form of your clothes. Are you dressed the right way? Not are you dressed in suit and tie if that's not appropriate. Are you dressed the right way according to how they're dressed and what they expect of you? Do you use the right kind of language? Are you aware of their acronyms? Do you understand a bit about the pecking order within this little group, about who's the real influencer, who's really the decision maker, and who are the people who just kind of tag along for the ride? Those sorts of sensitivities will let you communicate with them on their level much more easily than if you weren't aware of any of that. And these things tend to sound a little bit petty, but they're not. They're social signals. They're social signals of our authority, our competence, our knowledge of the situation that we're in, and they're all important to have in the back of our head and to strategically communicate.
Excellent. Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of the things that you're talking about here could be summed up with the term gravitas. Would you agree with that?
I love the term gravitas, and I mentioned before when you said that, my little rhetoric heart just went a flutter. Oh, I said gravitas. I'm such a happy person now. Yes. That is where gravitas comes into play. Where I am cautious in that use of the word is that we often think gravitas, it's heavy, it's ponderous, it's serious. It doesn't need to be. It's just that you have the right stuff. So you want to figure out, in terms of signaling gravitas, how can you get across that semblance of leadership presence while still staying true to your own personality? As with all of this talk, it's, I put such an emphasis on saying, well, what do the other people value? What do they want to see? What personality traits do they see as particularly important? But you still don't want to lose your sense of self, because inauthenticity makes it difficult to consistently communicate confidence. So you want to be authentic to your personality, but it's a matter of saying, okay, they need me to be concise and tough, and I'm a great big marshmallow. Which is true. I am a giant marshmallow. But if they need someone who is big and tough, what am I like when I'm at my toughest? So when I do show a spine of steel, what does that look like on me? And then that's how you communicate to them at that point in time. They need to see strong, proud, will not be moved, but is still unceasingly, unfailingly kind and polite Brian, as opposed to dad who just woke up early in the morning with his kids and he's tussling with them sort of Brian. So there's these different aspects of ourselves that we can pull on at any point in time when we need to pull out that side of our personality. And it takes introspection to figure out what this looks like on you, but everyone has this side. You know, sometimes I'll say what people might really need from a leader in a moment is a cheerleader. They need someone who's going to prop them up, who's going to make them feel good, who's going to reassure them that they can get through something. And for someone who is normally very serious, doesn't emote a lot, isn't necessarily the most huggy person in the world, it might be difficult for them to wrap their head around the notion of being someone's cheerleader. It will feel fake. To that, I would say, well, when you are encouraging someone, think of your kid, think of your sibling or of your spouse or of a friend. When you're being encouraging towards them, how do you speak? How do you behave? Okay, that's what the people in this workplace need from you right now. Maybe that's what that executive leadership team that you have to speak to need from you right now. So pull out that side of your personality and walk that into the room.
All right. Now that's a lot of good points there. Now, I guess I want to kind of reiterate and kind of circle back to what you're saying. So what I'm hearing is that we don't have to change who we are to achieve this executive presence or really any of these skills. I guess, could you elaborate on your thoughts of that?
Yeah, you don't need to change who you are, but what you do often need to do is refine it. So be very aware of the positive notes of those sides of your personality and work very strongly on communicating those. Be aware of your tripping points and where you might get into a side of your personality that doesn't help you put your best foot forward, and be on the watch to tame that sort of thing down. An example from my end is I love a joke. I love to laugh. And sometimes I can get a little bit carried away. So in certain rooms, I have to know, okay, Lauren, this is not the group where you can tease them mercilessly about certain things in their organization. They're sensitive about this. So tamp that down, bring the supportive, the supportive, elegant side of you out. That's the audience. That's what the audience needs right now. That's what these executive needs from you. So, you know, you need to maintain awareness of all of the different traits of your personalities and just say, okay, which one right now is best for this situation?
All right. And you had mentioned earlier, being concise is another thing that's important when communicating at that executive level. Would you care to elaborate on that, or do you think there's any other points that are important for that level of verbal communication?
Mhm. Within the sort of organizations that, you know, our listeners and our audience are with, there's often a significant time crunch. This holds true for usually any executive team, anyone who has significant authority in an organization. What they're trying to do is take information that you have, that only you have, and that you understand best, and interpret it to make a decision about something. If they're going to be able to make a decision with the information that you have, you need to be able to communicate it very, very clearly. And usually when someone understands a concept well, they're able to explain it with concision. They're able to be concise. So first up, that conciseness is going to demonstrate your knowledge and your competence. You don't need to over-explain things. You need to explain them just enough. The second thing there is that it's going to help the other parties understand what you're talking about. So it makes your knowledge more easily graspable, more easily understood, which means they can make better decisions. And the last thing is that it also shows them that you respect their time, that you're not going to waste their time, and that you understand that they don't have a lot of it. So it shows that you're sensitive to their situation as well, and that you'll get to the point, you'll be efficient. So conciseness carries with it a lot of those messages that people want to see in someone who has a great deal of authority or knowledge or responsibility. And that can communicate authority, soft authority, even if you don't have a large rank or title behind your name. These behaviors can give you more implied authority and make people behave towards you in that respect. So yeah, concision, conciseness, it's a very, very good skill to develop.
One of the other things that I found works well also is a concept I've learned from a podcast called Manager Tools, which is a great podcast, by the way. And they use this term, which is pre-wiring a meeting. So the idea behind pre-wiring a meeting is that you're communicating with some of the key stakeholders beforehand. And I guess there's a lot of advantages to it. You're not blindsiding anybody. People have an idea of what you're going to talk about, and you already know whether or not you have their support when you're going into the meeting. And I think this also translates well to something that we discussed earlier, which is planned spontaneity. Do you want to touch on those concepts a little bit?
I'd love to. Oh, you open up a door and I'll walk right through it. Oh, the more you plan for communication, the more your communication is successful. And planning for communication doesn't mean scripting out exactly what you want to say. What it means is that you're considering the situation that you're walking into. You are thinking about what your goals for the meeting are and what the goals of the other people in the room are, and then figuring out how you can help everyone meet those goals. So with pre-wiring a meeting, what you're effectively doing is saying, okay, this is what we are meeting about. Here's the topic. What are we trying to achieve by the end of the meeting? And I like to plan this out to the point where I have it down to a single sentence. It sounds like, kind of feels like you're writing a high school English paper thesis, but it works. By the end of this meeting, we will have done this thing. So we will have made this decision, or we will have agreed to X, Y, Z, or something like that, because now that becomes your North Star for the conversation. Then you ask yourself, what topics does the other person need to cover in order to get there? And I place this emphasis on the other person because you've already convinced yourself. You're not walking into these meetings generally in order to convince yourself of anything. Sometimes you might need to make a discovery. You might need information from the other person, and that will come into your plan. But I always like to think, what information are they walking in with? What do they need from me? Because these are the topics then that we're going to need to discuss. And I write down those topics. I will then brainstorm any other topics that we might need to talk about in relationship to those things. I then send an email to everyone who is going to the meeting, or at the very least to the key decision makers. It could be an email, it could be a telephone call. And all you need to do is say, hey, I want to make sure that we're on the same page and we can hit the ground running as soon as we're in this meeting. This is what I think we want to end up with at the end of the meeting. So here's our goal and our objective. And here's what I think we need to discuss. Does this sound right to you? And then they can say yes, they can say no, or they can say yes, and here's a bunch of other stuff that we need to talk about too.
Right. Now
everyone is on the same page. The meeting will be much more efficient, so you can achieve that beautiful conciseness that we're all aiming for. The meeting will be made way more efficient. It will be easier to stay on track, easier to have an efficient meeting. You're going to walk in with more inherent confidence because you know what you're going to be talking about. And it basically frees up your brain to have a better conversation. That's where that planned spontaneity comes in. If you have a rough outline of where you're going in a meeting, you can afford to let the creative communication side of your brain come out and be spontaneous, to grab subjects as they come up and know that you'll be able to tie them back to that meeting goal that you and the other people have already established. So it gives you more flexibility. Just having a rough plan. You're not scripting out everything you want to say, every line you're going to drop, unless you have a genius one. In that case, bless you, go right ahead. But you are creating a plan.
Right now, while we're on the topic of meetings, do you have any other suggestions with regards to meetings, how we can make them more effective? I'm sure that's something that everybody is plagued with, is having more effective meetings.
A big one is to try not to achieve too much in any given point in time. And this is where hot wiring can really, really help out. We need to stay sensitive to the amount of time it takes to communicate effectively, because it's longer than we think, much longer than we think. There's a lot going on when we're having a meeting, when we're communicating. And what I find the biggest stumbling block when people are arranging meetings is that they try to achieve too much out of the gate. They set the meeting goal to be way too big. They stuff the agenda full of more things than you can actually ever hope to discuss. So when you're doing that pre-planning, I say, you're laughing because you know it's true.
Absolutely.
Constantly. This happens constantly. So when you're doing that pre-planning, I always ask myself, can I achieve this goal? Can the people in this room achieve this goal given the time that we have? And considering that time, that's a big important question. Let's say you've got a 30-minute meeting. You know that 5 minutes is going to be spent in the usual pleasantries that many people engage in when sitting down in a room together or sitting down over video conference, which we're all limited to right now. There's going to be the pleasantries. You have to say hello. You have to comment on the weather. You have to ask John about his grandkids, because if you don't, John will be very upset with you. These are minutes that you don't have to reach your goal, but they're minutes that you still have to account for. So now maybe your 30-minute meeting is down to about 25 minutes. Then you have the different topics that you wanted to discuss. So topic A is probably, everyone kind of agrees on topic A anyway, so that'll probably only take 5 or so minutes. Topic B is real contentious. And I know that Maggie is going to go off on a tear the instant that I bring up this subject, because she always does. So you're going to want to allot more time to topic B. Let's say 15 minutes. Well, now your 25-minute meeting, 15 minutes of it are eaten up. Now you have only 10 minutes left. Can you talk about topic C in 10 minutes? What if topic C is also very contentious? So that's where I say you need to take that time into consideration. And if you think that you don't have enough time to reach that goal that you've set, break the goal down. Find a smaller one that you can reasonably achieve in that meeting. The more that you achieve in each meeting, the more times you can have a meeting, especially with executives, and say, yep, we did that. Check the box. We achieved that goal. The more trust they'll develop in you. That, hey, when I sit down with Brian, these are super efficient meetings. We always get done exactly what we say we're going to get done, and it doesn't take a minute longer than he needs to. So that planning, that timing, that size of the goal, these are things you really want to have nailed down.
One other thing too that I find effective, and this one's a little bit more difficult, but when you're not the one who's actually planning the meeting, is just understanding the facilitator, the person who's planning the meeting.
Yeah.
There's one meeting in particular that happens. I know based on when it gets scheduled, the time of day, and who's going to be there. I know it's almost going to go twice the length, so I'll always block off the time after that in my calendar. Or if there's something already pre-planned, I'll try to rearrange it. But have you had any experiences like that?
Absolutely. So pre-planning meetings, even when you're not in control of the agenda, or you don't have the license to say, is this what you people want to get done? Like, really? You don't always have that luxury. It's still worthwhile because, like you said, you know that these people are going to be in the room. You know what they're like. You know what the subject tends to create, you know, how people tend to react to all of that. You can then figure out how you're going to approach the meeting, how you're going to approach the conversation. You can be more careful in what you plan on saying and when. And then, like you said, if you need to block off that extra hour because they always just hold you hostage for that length of time, it doesn't take you by surprise. So whether or not you have control of the agenda, that pre-planning is a big deal. And it is going to depend on who is in the room. This is part of that aspect of understanding your audience that is so important to having executive presence. You need to know what they are like so that you can kind of take it upon yourself to work with their needs, with their personalities, with their limitations, sometimes, if you want to think about it that way. But that's all going to set you up for greater success.
Right now, the healthcare environment is often a very political one. How can we be prudent in our conduct in a politically charged environment like healthcare?
Mm-hmm. This comes back to understanding who is in the room, understanding what their roles are, and how it is they're going to be using the information that you have. I don't know many people who genuinely enjoy playing the political game because, you know, it can make it more difficult for us to do our work. But it's important to acknowledge that the political game exists, especially in large, complex organizations like hospitals and healthcare situations. And where politics really comes into play with all of this is that people will filter your information, they'll filter your messages, both spoken and unspoken, through that political lens. So understanding who is in the room when you're having a meeting and what their political concerns may be within the organization, the relationships that are in there, that can help you position yourself to make your message clearer, to let you think about how you're going to express your ideas, express your recommendations, and so on, in a way that can kind of circumnavigate any politics that might be interfering with it. It doesn't make it perfect, but it does make it more possible for you to manage and control your own message, because you're going to be thinking about your message and your information as it will be interpreted through a political lens. So that will help you figure out the different spins that could be put on your information and figure out how to work around them. This is a big aspect of people who have strong executive presence. They know the relationships. They tend to be very, very cognizant of the political machinations that are happening in the background, and they work within them. They don't necessarily join them, but they work within them so that they can retain that clarity and they can keep their own messaging consistent and consistently give off the impression that they want to give. I try not to place value judgments on politics when I'm needing to work in a politically charged environment, especially if I want none of the politics myself. Not passing judgment is important because that helps you avoid getting sucked into the political game. Sometimes you do have to get sucked into the political game, especially if there's serious decision making that needs to be had. But in general, I try to avoid it. And it's about that pre-planning. It's about that understanding of the people who are in the room and what are their relationships like.
I know I mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but the Manager Tools podcast has a great series on politics as well. So definitely something worth listening to.
A very useful word when you're considering the presence in politics is ethos. I know that you and I chatted about that before. It's actually one of my favorite rhetorical concepts, but executive presence and leadership, ethos is the language of presence and leadership. And it's all about what sort of impression are you giving off? Do people trust you? How can you get them to trust you? How can you get them to like you? How can you help them see you as part of the scene, as part of the scenario? And if it sounds a lot like politics, yeah, it's because ethos is also the language of politics. But that sort of relationship communication is really important. And that is going to be communicated through things like, are you wearing the right thing? Are you dressed according to the role they expect you to have and that they need to see you as having? Are you using the right language? Are you sensitive to the relationships in the room? Can you demonstrate that you have knowledge about how things really work in the hospital or in the organization or within that committee? All of that is going to build up your ethos, and all of that will help make you a better communicator in these situations, even if you are not coming at it in a position of significant authority in the room.
Awesome. Now, we went through quite a bit there in a really short time. Is there anything that I haven't mentioned that you'd like to discuss or anything you'd like to elaborate on further?
I think a parting thought is that what we're talking about here, again, isn't tied to your job title.
Right.
When you're coming into a room to speak with people at any level, I like to identify the value that I'm bringing, the expertise that I have, and the role that I'm playing external to my job title, external to the label that has already been placed on me. Because when you dig into it, when you say, okay, this is the value I really have, this is the knowledge that I have that no one else in the room has, that they really need from me in order to do their job. And this is where I think they need to go in terms of the communication. Here's what I think they need emotionally from me in certain respects. You can kind of take yourself out of the hierarchy. And you can approach people who might have a ton more authority than you technically have on paper. You can start to approach them from a peer-to-peer level, because now you're looking at the relationship from a peer level. You're not letting the job titles impede your presence. You're not being held back by those labels and those constraints that have been placed on you that way. This doesn't mean that you are ever disrespectful to anyone else in the room. Definitely avoid any impression of arrogance. That turns everyone off right away. But it does help you think about your relationship with the other people beyond your position in the official hierarchy. And that can ratchet your executive presence up hugely. It gives that impression of confidence, of certainty, of authority, of competence. And that's what people really, really want out of anyone that they're talking to. Can this person help me do my job better? And if you can help the executives do their job better, you will have outstanding executive presence.
Awesome. Now, what can we expect from you in the near future, in the coming months?
Oh, I've got a few projects. I blame COVID. I've got a few projects on the go. In the coming months, I'm going to be every year, twice a year, I've run an in-person group class, which an in-person group class on public speaking and communication skills, titled Public Speaking for the Beginners and the Truly Terrified. It's actually aimed largely at people in managerial positions, but the name is kind of tongue-in-cheek. Now, I've always done this as an in-person class in Edmonton, which isn't happening this year, needless to say. So for the first time, I'm going to be launching it as a live online course starting in September. So if you head to my website and sign up for the newsletter, you'll get the announcement when I open up registration. I'm also going to be releasing my first asynchronous course. So this is one of those take on your own schedule courses called Business Presentation Mastery. And it is your soup to nuts course on how to give outstanding presentations and talks in a business environment. And that will be released in mid-September. So I've got a few things coming up for anyone out there who is needing to do a whole lot of video conferencing now, as most of our meetings are taking place over video conference. I do have a quick and dirty little mini course called Making the Most of Video Conferences on video conferencing skills. So I've got a bunch of new resources available on the website. And of course, I'm always putting out new videos, communication Q&A, quick tips on different communication strategies and advice on sticky communication situations that you can apply to your everyday work and life. So lots of resources over on my website, and the website is Lauren Sergy, spelled LaurenSergy.com.
Awesome. And as we wrap up, do you have a special message for the Healthcare Security Cast community?
I do. You have specialized knowledge, an understanding of a very real working aspect of day-to-day hospital life that the people who are in high administrative level positions often don't have. They don't see the boots on the ground reality of dealing with people who are stressed out in difficult situations outside of that lens of health in the same way that you do. And for them to do their job better, to make the hospitals better, they need that knowledge that you have. So you are at a very, very high level of authority, a very high level of competence, even if the politics within the organization typically cast you in a lower role. You have knowledge and information that they need. And when you communicate it well, you are helping everyone do better.
Excellent. And I guess the last question that I'll ask is, how can we connect with you?
Easiest way to connect with me is to head over to my website, laurensergy.com. There's a contact form there. Or if you want to bypass that and just email me directly, lauren@laurensergy.com. And yeah, if you have a tricky question or a situation that you want me to weigh in on, drop me an email. I'm very accessible. I might ask if I can make that question part of my communication Q&A series, because that is how I get my content. But please, by all means, reach out. I'm here to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today, Lauren. I really appreciate it. And again, lots of valuable information here.
Thank you so much, Brian.
All right, and this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Join us again on Tuesday, August the 11th, when we're joined by Connie Packard. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay safe and take care.